The digital clock on Sarah Johnson's dashboard blinked 11:47 p.m. as she navigated her Honda Civic through the rain-slicked streets of downtown Memphis. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her mind remained alert, still processing the events of the past 4 hours. Little Marcus, only 8 years old, had finally fallen asleep in his hospital bed, his tiny hand clutching the stuffed lion she brought him. As a social worker for 12 years, Sarah had seen her share of difficult cases, but this one touched her differently. Marcus reminded her of her younger brother at that age. All wide eyes and brave smiles, even when scared. She had stayed long past her usual hours, reading him stories until his trembling subsided and sleep finally claimed him. Droplets of rain danced across her windshield as she turned onto Maple Avenue, the familiar route home promising a warm bed and much-needed rest. The streets were nearly empty, with only the occasional passing car and the rhythmic swish of her wipers breaking the late-night silence. Sarah adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her tired reflection, her usually neat braids slightly disheveled from the long day. The flash of red and blue lights startled her from her thoughts. Sarah glanced at her speedometer. 32 in a 35 zone. Her heart began to race, not from fear, but from the familiar wariness of what might come next. She'd been here before, too many times to count. Her hands instinctively moved to the proper position on the steering wheel as she pulled over, muscle memory from her father's careful teachings years ago. License and registration ready, hands visible, calm voice. His words echoed in her mind. At 35, Sarah had built a respected career helping children in crisis, earned her master's degree, and just last month had been approved for a mortgage on her dream home. Yet here she was, reciting her father's lessons like a nervous teenager. Through her side mirror, Sarah watched the officer approach, his flashlight beam dancing across her license plate. She noticed her hands trembling slightly and took a deep breath, drawing strength from the memory of little Marcus's courage just hours before. If he could face his fears, so could she. The rain had settled into a gentle drizzle now, creating halos around the streetlights. Sarah reached for her purse, retrieving her credentials with practiced efficiency. Her fingers brushed against something metal. The Carnegie medal she always carried, a reminder of promises kept and lives touched. She'd never shown it to anyone, preferring to let her daily work speak for itself. "Good evening, ma'am." The officer's voice cut through the quiet night. Sarah noticed his nameplate read Officer Reynolds as his flashlight beam swept across her interior. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, sir, I don't," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She just had her car serviced last week, making sure everything was in perfect order before the rainy season hit. "Your left taillight's out," Officer Reynolds stated, though Sarah distinctly remembered the mechanic testing both lights in her presence. "I'm also noting your inspection sticker appears to be expired." Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. The inspection sticker was new, dated just 7 days ago. She could see its crisp edges from where she sat. This night, it seemed, was about to become much longer than she planned. Little did Sarah know, this routine traffic stop would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge not just her patience, but the very foundations of justice in her community. The marble halls of the Jefferson County Courthouse echoed with footsteps as Sarah Johnson made her way through the security checkpoint at precisely 8:45 a.m. Her navy suit, pressed the night before, stood out among the crowd of mourning cases. She'd chosen it carefully, professional, respectful, and carrying the quiet confidence she'd earned through years of public service. The courthouse lobby buzzed with nervous energy. Sarah found herself beside a young mother struggling to balance a diaper bag while soothing a fussy infant. Without hesitation, Sarah reached out to steady the bag as it slipped from the woman's shoulder. "Here, let me help," she offered, her social worker's instincts kicking in naturally. "Thank you," the mother whispered, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. "I've been here since 8, and Jenny hasn't stopped crying." Sarah retrieved a granola bar from her purse, the same one she'd packed for her long hospital visit with Marcus the night before. The baby's eyes lit up at the sight of the wrapper. "I'm Maria," the young mother said, carefully breaking the bar into tiny pieces for Jenny. "First time here. Parking ticket I can't afford to pay." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Sarah nodded understandingly, her own citation feeling heavy in her pocket. As they talked, she learned Maria worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at a diner and evening telehealth customer service from home. The parking ticket had come during a rushed hospital visit when Jenny had a high fever. The courtroom doors opened at 9:00 a.m. sharp, and the assembled crowd filed in like a solemn procession. Sarah and Maria found seats together in the 3rd row, Jenny now quietly munching on her snack. The wood-paneled room carried the weight of countless decisions made within its walls, some lives changed forever by the bang of a gavel. Sarah observed as Judge William Harrison entered promptly at 9:15 a.m. His reputation preceded him, 20 years on the bench, known for efficiency and fairness. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an appearance of wisdom that commanded respect from everyone present. As cases began, Sarah watched his methodical approach. He listened carefully to each situation, asking pointed questions that revealed his sharp mind and attention to detail. When an elderly man explained his late registration was due to recent surgery, the judge reduced his fine and arranged a payment plan. Sarah felt her tension ease slightly. Perhaps this would go better than expected. Maria's case came up before Sarah's. Without thinking, Sarah offered to hold Jenny while Maria approached the bench. The judge's stern expression softened slightly at the sight of the young mother, her hands trembling as she explained her situation. He reviewed her perfect driving record and reduced the fine to a warning, suggesting resources for working parents. Maria's tears of relief were genuine as she hugged Sarah afterward. "Number 47, Sarah Johnson," the clerk called out. As Sarah stood, straightening her jacket, Maria squeezed her hand in solidarity. Walking toward the bench, Sarah felt dozens of eyes following her movement. She'd stood before many authority figures in her career, advocating for children who had no voice. Yet something felt different today. Judge Harrison glanced up from his papers, his initial look of routine boredom shifting to something else, something Sarah couldn't quite read. In that moment, neither of them could have predicted how their lives would intertwine, or how the next few minutes would challenge everything they thought they knew about justice and judgment. The oak-paneled courtroom fell silent as Sarah approached the bench, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Judge William Harrison sat above her, his presence commanding attention from his elevated position. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast shadows across his face, highlighting the deep lines earned from 2 decades of passing judgment. Case number 47. Traffic violation on Maple Avenue. November 15th, the clerk announced, her voice carrying through the hushed room. Sarah stood straight, hands clasped in front of her, the way she did when presenting cases to the Child Welfare Board. She prepared her evidence meticulously, the recent mechanic's receipt, photos of her working taillight, and the valid inspection sticker, all organized in a neat folder. Judge Harrison's reputation for thoroughness was well known throughout Jefferson County. Earlier that morning, Sarah had watched him spend 15 minutes helping a senior citizen understand his parking violation, patiently explaining the appeals process. He'd even shared a warm smile with Maria, the young mother Sarah had befriended, before dismissing her case with understanding. But something shifted when he looked at Sarah's file. The warmth that had characterized his previous interactions disappeared, replaced by a cursory glance that lasted mere seconds. "Officer Reynolds cited you for an inoperable taillight and expired inspection," he stated flatly, not looking up from the papers. "Your Honor, I have documentation showing," Sarah began, her voice steadied despite her rising concern. "The citation clearly states the violations," Judge Harrison interrupted, shuffling the papers with unusual haste. The same judge who'd spent minutes examining a parking ticket was now rushing through her case as if it were already decided. The gallery behind Sarah stirred uncomfortably. Maria, still seated in the 3rd row with baby Jenny, leaned forward with a frown. Even the clerk paused her typing, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she glanced between Sarah and the judge. "But sir," Sarah tried again, opening her folder, "I had my car serviced just last week. I have the receipt showing." "Ms. Johnson," Judge Harrison's voice cut through the air like a knife, "this court has a full docket today. The fine is $500, due within 30 days. His gavel hovered, ready to seal her fate. Sarah felt her chest tighten, not from the fine itself. Her social worker's salary could handle that, but from the stark contrast between this treatment and what she'd witnessed all morning. The judge who had shown such patience and wisdom seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone who wouldn't even meet her eyes. The clerk's fingers resumed their dance across the keyboard, recording the judgment. Sarah reached for her purse, her movements deliberate and dignified, despite the rush of emotions beneath her composed exterior. As she opened the class, searching for her phone to photograph the citation details, something golden slipped from between her wallet and checkbook. The Carnegie medal caught the morning sun as it fell, its polished surface creating a brief flash of light that drew every eye in the courtroom. It landed with a musical ping that seemed to echo in the sudden silence, spinning on its edge before coming to rest at the base of the judge's bench. No one moved. Judge Harrison's gavel remained suspended in midair, his eyes fixed on the gleaming medal that had so unexpectedly interrupted his hasty judgment. In that frozen moment, as all eyes turned from the medal to Sarah and back again, the atmosphere in courtroom 3 shifted dramatically. The story that would unfold in the next few minutes would change not just this case, but the very way justice was administered in Jefferson County. Time seemed to slow as the Carnegie medal finished its final spin on the courthouse floor. The morning sunlight caught its golden surface, sending shafts of light dancing across the wood-paneled walls. The inscription faced upward, its letters clear and bold, "Presented to Sarah Johnson for extraordinary heroism." The young clerk, Miss Peterson, was the first to move. Rising from her seat, she bent down to retrieve the medal, her eyes widening as she read the inscription. Her usual professional demeanor slipped as she looked at Sarah with newfound wonder. "Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is a Carnegie Medal for heroism." Judge Harrison's stern expression faltered. In his 20 years on the bench, he'd seen countless awards and commendations presented as character evidence, but a Carnegie Medal was different. Only a handful were awarded each year, and only for acts of exceptional courage and self-sacrifice. "Approach the bench, Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice notably softer than moments before. Sarah walked forward, her navy heels clicking against the floor in the still silent courtroom. Even baby Jenny, who had been fussing in the gallery, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The medal passed from Miss Peterson's hands to the judge's. He held it with the reverence it deserved, running his thumb over the raised image of Andrew Carnegie on its face. "This medal," he said, looking directly at Sarah for the first time, "is awarded only to civilians who risk their lives to save others." "When did you receive this?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, maintaining her dignity. "6 months ago, Your Honor, but I don't carry it for recognition. It's a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Judge Harrison leaned forward, the traffic citation forgotten on his desk. "That every moment we have to help others is precious," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "I keep it with me during my hardest days as a social worker, when I'm trying to protect children who have no one else to speak for them." Maria, still seated in the gallery, hugged Jenny closer. Other observers leaned forward, drawn into the unfolding story. Ms. Peterson had stopped typing entirely, her hands hovering motionless over her keyboard. Judge Harrison studied the medal citation more closely, his expression changing as he read the details. His hands, which had been so quick to dismiss Sarah's case minutes before, now trembled slightly. "This date," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "August 15th. The highway accident on Route 27. Sarah nodded, unconsciously touching the barely visible scar on her right hand, a permanent reminder of that morning. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge sank back in his chair, the medal gleaming in his hands. The gallery watched in amazement as his judicial mask cracked, revealing raw emotion beneath. "Ms. Johnson," he said finally, "I believe this court owes you more than just a few moments of its time." He carefully placed the medal on his bench, next to Sarah's previously dismissed documentation. The morning sun continued to catch its surface, but now the light seemed to illuminate something else, a moment of transformation, as justice and humanity met in the most unexpected way. What no one in the courtroom yet knew, not even Sarah, was that Judge Harrison had a deeply personal connection to that August morning on Route 27. The story that was about to unfold would shake the foundations of his carefully ordered world and change both their lives forever. "Please, Ms. Johnson." Judge Harrison gestured to the witness stand, an unusual move for a traffic court proceeding. "Tell us about that morning." The entire courtroom leaned forward, eager to hear the story behind the medal that had changed the atmosphere so dramatically. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind traveling back to that summer dawn. "I was on my morning jog along Route 27, she began, her voice steady. The sunrise was just breaking over the trees. I remember because I'd stopped to take a photo of the sky turning pink." She paused, collecting her thoughts. That's when I heard it. The sound of tires screeching, then impact. The crash happened around the bend, but I could see the smoke rising. Her hands clasped together tightly as she continued. "I called 911 while running toward the scene. The dispatcher said help was 12 minutes away." The gallery listened in complete silence as Sarah described rounding the curve to find a minivan overturned, smoke pouring from its engine. There was a woman on the ground nearby, unconscious, but I could hear children crying inside the van. Judge Harrison's face had lost all its previous sternness. His hands gripped the edge of his bench as Sarah described reaching the vehicle. The smoke was getting thicker. I could see 3 car seats through the passenger window. The first child, a 4-year-old girl, was easiest to reach. Her car seat had partially dislodged. Sarah's voice wavered slightly for the first time. "After getting her out, I heard the engine make this popping sound. Flames started appearing under the hood, but I could still hear crying inside." She unconsciously rubbed the scar on her hand. The second child, a 2-year-old boy, was harder to reach. The heat was intense by then. My jacket caught fire as I was unbuckling him. Several people in the courtroom gasped. Ms. Peterson wiped tears from her eyes, her transcription forgotten. Even baby Jenny seemed transfixed by Sarah's voice. "The last child." Sarah paused, collecting herself. "The last one was just 6 months old." The flames were spreading into the passenger compartment. I couldn't see through the smoke anymore. I had to feel my way to the car seat by touch. She looked down at her hands, remembering. I don't actually remember getting her out. The firefighters told me later they found me cradling her 30 feet from the vehicle, moments before it exploded. Judge Harrison's voice cracked as he asked, "And the children?" "All 3 survived," Sarah said, a small smile finally breaking through her serious expression. "I visited them in the hospital every day for a week. Their mother recovered too. The youngest one, Emma, just had her first birthday last month." The judge removed his glasses, wiping them with trembling hands. "Emma," he repeated softly. "My grandniece's name is Emma." A murmur ran through the courtroom as understanding dawned. Sarah's eyes widened as the judge continued. "My nephew's wife was driving their children to visit us that morning. When we got the call about the accident, he had to pause, composing himself. The firefighters told us a jogger had saved them, but she'd left in an ambulance before we arrived. 2nd-degree burns," they said. "We've been trying to find you ever since." The sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows seemed to glow brighter, illuminating the tears now flowing freely down Judge Harrison's face. The Carnegie medal on his bench gleamed, but its golden surface paled in comparison to the richness of the moment unfolding in courtroom 3. Judge William Harrison stared at the Carnegie medal on his bench, seeing it through new eyes. The courtroom remained silent, the regular bustle of legal proceedings forgotten as everyone watched the transformation taking place before them. The stern judge who had started the morning dispensing swift justice now sat humbled, his wire-rimmed glasses clutched in trembling hands. "Emma just took her first steps last week," he said softly, almost to himself. "She might never have had that chance if—" His voice trailed off as he looked at Sarah, seeing past her navy suit and professional demeanor to the hero who had braved flames to save his family. Rising from his chair, Judge Harrison did something unprecedented in his 20 years on the bench. He stepped down to the courtroom floor. The gallery watched in amazement as he approached Sarah, who still sat in the witness stand. His usual commanding presence was replaced by a grandfather's gentle vulnerability. "The burns," he said, gesturing to her hands. "The hospital report mentioned severe burns and smoke inhalation. Yet you were back at work within a week." Sarah nodded, unconsciously adjusting her sleeve to cover a faint scar. "The children I work with, they needed me. One of my cases was going to court that Tuesday. A 6-year-old girl was counting on me to be there." The judge shook his head in wonder. "All this time, we've been searching. My family wanted to thank you, to understand why someone would risk everything for strangers. Emma's mother, my nephew's wife. She lights a candle every morning, praying for the angel who saved her children." Ms. Peterson, the clerk, quietly passed Judge Harrison a tissue. In the gallery, Maria hugged baby Jenny closer, tears streaming down her face. Other observers dabbed at their eyes, moved by the unfolding scene. "And here you were," the judge continued, his voice heavy with emotion, "standing in my courtroom, facing a fine I imposed without even looking up from my papers." The shame in his voice was palpable. "I've prided myself on being a fair judge, on looking at each case individually. Yet today," Sarah's voice was gentle but firm, "Your Honor, you've shown fairness to everyone else this morning. I watched you help that elderly gentleman, guide that young mother. One moment doesn't define your career." Judge Harrison straightened, years of judicial training warring with personal emotion. But it could have. If that medal hadn't fallen. He turned to address the entire courtroom. "How many other times have I failed to see the full person standing before me? How many stories have I missed because I thought I already knew the ending?" The morning sun had climbed higher, its rays now flooding the entire courtroom. It illuminated the judge's silver hair, Sarah's composed features, and the faces of every person watching this remarkable scene unfold. The light seemed to underscore the truth of the moment. That justice without compassion is no justice at all. Judge Harrison returned to his bench, but he was not the same man who had ascended it that morning. He looked at Sarah's case file with new eyes, at the documentation she had tried to present earlier. But more than that, he looked at Sarah herself, not as a case number or a traffic violation, but as a human being whose courage and dedication had touched his life in the most profound way possible. The next few minutes would bring more than just a decision about a traffic ticket. They would launch changes that would ripple through the entire judicial system of Jefferson County. "This court will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Harrison announced, his voice carrying a weight unrelated to its volume. He lifted the Carnegie medal with careful hands and gestured to Sarah. "Ms. Johnson, would you join me in my chambers? Ms. Peterson, please bring the full case file." As Sarah followed the judge through the heavy oak door behind the bench, the courtroom erupted into hushed conversations. Maria, still holding baby Jenny, whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for having witnessed such a moment of transformation. Inside the judge's chambers, morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls lined with law books and family photographs. Judge Harrison's eyes lingered on a recent photo of 3 children. Emma and her siblings, their smiles bright and alive because of the woman standing before him. "Please, sit." He gestured to a leather chair, his formal demeanor softened by emotion. Ms. Peterson entered with the case file, placing it on the massive desk before quietly withdrawing. The judge opened the folder, this time actually reading its contents. "You tried to tell me about the repair work," he said, examining the mechanic's receipt dated a week before the citation. "And this inspection sticker." He pulled out his reading glasses, studying the clearly valid date. Sarah sat quietly, her composure unwavering. The same patience she showed with frightened children in her care now extended to this moment, allowing the judge the time he needed to process everything. "Officer Reynolds," Judge Harrison murmured, reviewing the citation. "There's something familiar about his pattern of tickets." He turned to his computer, fingers typing rapidly. "In the past month alone. Ms. Peterson, could you pull the statistics for Officer Reynolds' citations from the past 6 months?" The clerk returned moments later with a printout. Judge Harrison's frown deepened as he studied the numbers. "A disturbing pattern emerges," he said, more to himself than to Sarah. "The demographics of his stops compared to our county's population." He looked up at Sarah, his expression troubled. "Your medal revealed more than just your heroism, Miss Johnson. It exposed flaws in our system. Flaws I should have seen sooner." He removed his glasses, rubbing his temples. "We focus so much on processing cases efficiently that we sometimes forget each file represents a human life, a story, a truth we need to hear." Rising from his desk, Judge Harrison paced to the window. Below, the courthouse square buzzed with daily life. People going about their business, trusting in the system he helped maintain. "Your case will be dismissed," he said finally, turning back to Sarah. "But that's not enough." He returned to his desk, pulling out a legal pad. "I'm initiating a full review of our traffic court procedures. We need better oversight, mandatory bias training, and a complete audit of citation patterns." His pen moved quickly across the paper. "Would you be willing to help us, Ms. Johnson? Your perspective as both a social worker and someone who's experienced these issues firsthand would be invaluable." Sarah leaned forward, her professional instincts engaging. "What exactly are you proposing, Your Honor?" "A task force," he replied, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "Not just examining traffic stops, but looking at all points where our justice system might be falling short of its ideals. Your experience protecting children, seeing the human side of legal proceedings. We need that insight." A knock at the door signaled the recess was ending. Judge Harrison gathered his notes, then paused, looking at Sarah with newfound respect. "Shall we return to court? There's work to be done." Together, they stood to face not just the waiting courtroom, but the challenge of transforming a system that needed to remember its humanity. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Sarah Johnson emerged from the building, her traffic citation not just dismissed but transformed into something far more meaningful. Behind her, the heavy doors closed on a day that had changed not just her life, but the entire Jefferson County judicial system. Inside her purse, alongside the Carnegie medal that had sparked this transformation, lay a new document, her official appointment to the Jefferson County Judicial Review Task Force. Judge Harrison had announced its formation from the bench, his voice ringing with purpose as he outlined its mission to the packed courtroom. Maria, who had waited with baby Jenny to thank Sarah, had been the first to applaud. The entire gallery had joined in, creating a moment unprecedented in the courthouse's stern history. Even Miss Peterson, the usually stoic clerk, had smiled broadly as she recorded the proceedings. 1 month later, the task force's first meeting convened in the courthouse conference room. Sarah sat at the large oak table alongside Judge Harrison, legal experts, civil rights advocates, and community leaders. On the wall hung the framed photograph of 3 children, Emma and her siblings, a reminder of why their work mattered. In our first month of review, Judge Harrison announced to the assembled press, "We've identified significant patterns that require immediate attention. But more importantly, we've begun implementing changes." His eyes met Sarah's as he continued, "Every case now receives thorough review. Every person who enters our courthouse will be seen, heard, and treated with dignity." The changes rippled outward. Officer Reynolds and others like him underwent mandatory retraining. The department instituted new oversight procedures. Traffic stop data was now publicly available. ensuring transparency. But perhaps most significantly, other jurisdictions began to take notice. Sarah's role expanded beyond the task force. She began conducting training sessions for judicial officers, sharing her unique perspective as both a social worker and someone who had experienced the system's flaws firsthand. Her quiet strength and dedication inspired others to look beyond paperwork to see the humanity in every case. 6 months after that fateful morning in traffic court, Sarah stood again before Judge Harrison, this time to present the task force's comprehensive findings to the State Judicial Conference. As she spoke about the importance of compassion in justice, heads nodded throughout the auditorium. Her story, and the changes it sparked, would soon influence courts across the state. Yet Sarah remained focused on her daily work with children in crisis. The Carnegie Medal stayed in her purse, not as a symbol of past heroism, but as a reminder that everyday courage, whether facing flames or fighting for justice, could transform lives. Judge Harrison, too, was transformed. His courtroom became known for its careful attention to every case, no matter how small. He kept a small photo on his bench, hidden from public view. 3 children smiling at a recent birthday party, alive because of a chance encounter with a hero who had stood before him seeking justice. 1 year to the day after Sarah's traffic court appearance, she received an invitation to Emma's 3rd birthday party. As she watched the little girl blow out her candles, surrounded by family who were now her friends, Sarah understood that true justice, like true heroism, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about seeing each person's humanity, one case, one moment, one life at a time. Back in her office at Child Services, Sarah's Carnegie Medal now had a companion. A small plaque commemorating the hundreds of cases reviewed and lives touched by the task force's work. But it was the thank you drawings from children she'd helped that lined her walls, reminding her daily that every person's story deserved to be heard, and every life had the potential to change others for the better.